New day at the garage, another project there, ladies and germs. So I've been having a problem on the old two-wheel drive Ford Ranger where the front wheel bearings don't want to maintain their preload. Some of that's probably my fault. I've probably set this truck up for failure out of the box. I've got a used mix of Chinese bearings in these rotors. Some new races, some used bearings, all China parts. So that's less than ideal. They're not making any noise or doing anything, like growling or anything like that. They just have play in them. No matter how much preload I put, I've gotten to where I've been cranking the nut down with a 1/2-inch ratchet and check them a day later and there's play in them. So I think these bearings are done. So let's get this thing jacked up, put on the old jack stands, and we're going to give it a fighting chance by putting a new set of KOYO bearings in there. Pick these little beauties up from Napa. Japanese made, they're great bearings. Ford uses a lot of KOYO bearings in their stuff. Tried to find some Timkins, but without waiting a month to get them, for some reason these old tapered bearings are kind of getting obsolete because, well, most cars don't use them anymore. Anyways, I'll be back after I get it jacked up, put on the old jack stands. Alright, so really quick before I pop the wheels off, this may not show, but I think you'll hear it. I can rattle the wheel on the bearings. I've heard some people say that's normal. I don't believe that for a second. There should not be easy play in the wheel. Let's see if we can get this sorted out. I'll be back after I get the wheels off. Alright, we're ready to get after it. You'll have to pardon all the airplanes. I live in airplane land. Alright, so for the sake of filmography, I cheated and I broke the caliper bolts loose. We've got to take out this bolt in here in the steering knuckle and this bolt right here. Those are 15 millimeters. Because I'm too lazy to unlock the steering wheel, I use a short 15 millimeter to get the bottom one loose and a deep 15 millimeter to get the top one loose in the steering knuckle. In order to get to the wheel bearings on these, you don't have a choice but to take the caliper off and set it aside. So our second one. Resist the urge to let the caliper hang by the hose. Get yourself a old paint can or something. That's what I use. That'll just hold the old caliper there. No tension on the rubber. I can rattle this rotor even with no wheel on it. I found the best way to get the dust cap out without mutilating it is to get yourself a cold chisel. Just barely tap on it in an outward direction. That way you're not squishing the crap out of it with a pair of channel locks. Take our cotter pin out. Make sure you get a new pair of cotter pins for this job. I don't recommend reusing the old ones unless it's an emergency. Here's your retainer that keeps the nut from spinning. And I can guarantee you that these nuts are going to be completely loose. Well, I lied. This is one of the ones that I reefed on. And as you can see, it is still The nut is tight, but there's still play in the bearings. I didn't figure it would take much. So in my case, I'm going to be throwing these bearings away and replacing them. If you're just doing a repack, obviously you would clean those out and get them ready for reuse. I'm going to haul this rotor into the garage and we'll hit up the next steps. I got to get the races out. First we got to get the old bearing and seal out. Whoopsie. Try not to drop your rotors on concrete. They'll actually chip edges off. So what I'm doing now is I'm just hitting the bearing and we're knocking the seal out. So here's the inner bearing and the seal together. I'm throwing both of those away. Here's my outer bearing. It's going in the garbage can. Like I said, get new seals and get new cotter pins at the minimum, even if you're just re-greasing your bearings. So these are aftermarket rotors, and these rotors don't have scallops in the casting for the races to get them out. So all you get is you get the very edge of the race. So get yourself a big flat bladed screwdriver, or preferably like a brass drift, and we're going to go in. Hear that? That's the edge of the race. Lay your drift over all the way to the edge and that'll keep it from slipping off the race. We're going to move it. You'll feel it moving. That one's out. So that's our old outer race going in the garbage. Now we're going to do the same thing with the inner race. Turn it. Turn it. The inner races are always harder than the outer races because it's much bigger bearing. Should be almost out. There she goes. So our outer race, garbage. Okay, now I'm going to use these nasty rags to wipe the big chunks of grease out of the hub. Don't worry too much about getting grease on the rotor. You're going to give them a final wipe down with some brake clean before you put your caliper back on. The inside of the hub doesn't need to be spotless, but if you're changing brands of grease or using a different kind of grease, I always try and get as clean as possible. So here's our new outer bearing. This is a A4461, and our inner bearing is a A4363, both KOYOs. And then our new inner wheel bearing seal is a 9150S, as in Sierra. And even though this is a Duralast seal, I believe that 9150S is a number that's used by a lot of brands, I think. If you buy bearings packaged together, try not to break them up. So leave your races with the bearings they came in. And I always recommend, even with new bearings, that you go through and wash them. Even if it's just a little bit of isopropyl. We'll take a toothbrush and air nozzle to the races or to the bearings themselves. Not so much the races, we'll just wipe off the races. Generally speaking, this procedure is going to apply across the board to anything that has tapered wheel bearings, tapered roller bearings that need to be packed and re-greased and packed every once in a while. Some of you know this, some of you don't, but this truck does have a V8 swap in it. So it's probably every bit as heavy as like a 4-liter Ranger. You're putting maybe a little extra load on these bearings. Okay, the bearings I'm going to tap in on the floor because we need to have it very rigid or you'll lose energy. I'm going to put just a film of grease on the outside of the race to help it slide in. Not much, just enough to cover it. Put a little bit in the bore. Am I getting a little bit of dog hair in your wheel bearings? Okay, to get these started, they're always going to want to try and cock on you a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get one edge started and then I'm just going to start walking it around until it's flush. Using a piece of brass, it will not hurt that race. Okay, now that it's started, we're going to switch over to our bearing tool. And we're going to pound that race in until you hear a tone change. Hear the rotor bounce? When the rotor bounces, that race is seated. There's lots of different tools you can come up with to get those races seated in there. Whatever you use, just make sure you don't damage the race and that you make sure it's fully seated. Okay, we're going to do the same exact thing with the small outer bearing. Okay, I've got another race tool. This one I'm going to run flipped upside down. Now again, we're going to listen for that tone change. Okay, that one's all the way in. Going to take a clean towel and a little bit of alcohol. Just give these races one final wipe down and the bore of the hub. Get a little scrubby dub on the old bearings. These bearings are brand new, so they're not really dirty. We're just taking the shipping oil off of them that they put on there to keep them from rusting. This is just some 99% alcohol. And use a little compressed air. Don't let the bearing spin. I don't recommend using Chinese bearings if you can avoid it. Give a quick little scrub of the old nut and our washer. For some reason, the washer on the driver's side had quite a bit of wear where it had been riding up against the race of the bearing. If I find the play comes back in the driver's side for any reason, I'll be buying a new one of these washers. This one does not have that wear on it. All right, we're ready to pack. We got our trusty Mobil 1 synthetic. I'm gonna just put a film of this inside the middle of the hub. It does not need to be packed full. Just a nice little coating. Now take a blob. I hope I don't get this on my brand new sweatshirt. Right in the palm. That's how much is down inside the hub. We're going to take our bearing with the wide end, open end into the grease. And we're just going to sit here and we're going to push grease into this bearing until we see it coming up through the rollers on this side. You can already see grease coming through those rollers. Don't stop until you're certain that you got grease fully through the rollers. That's pretty much it right there. Okay, we're just going to take this greased up bearing and we're going to plop it in the back side of the rotor. Okay, since my glove is already messy, I take the time to go ahead and pack the outer bearing, the little guy, same way. And once he's packed, we'll set him aside. Get a little grease on your preload nut and your washer. And I'm going to take this grease and I'm going to put it in the other side of the rotor. Okay, there's plenty of grease in there. Now I'm going to degrease myself and we're going to put the seal in. We want to put a little bit of grease in the seal lip. There's no sense in burning up this brand new wheel bearing seal. These seals can be a real pain in the ass to get started. They want to just cock over real bad and lay over on you. Once we get it started, we'll get it pounded down in there. Okay, now it's started. I'm going to switch over to the brass drift and I'm just going to walk the edge of that seal down all the way flat onto the rotor. My brass drift is pretty beat up, so it's putting little boogers in the seal, but it won't hurt a thing. Outer bearing. Some people will wait to put that outer bearing in till after it's back onto the spindle, but I usually put it in first just to keep it safe keepings. Okay, let's go clean up the spindle real quick. We want to get the old grease off of the spindle and inspect the spindle. Look for any hot spots or scoring, or if you got a bearing going bad, it can actually tear the spindle up because it'll spin. The race will spin on the spindle and it'll ruin it. Again, this doesn't need to be 100% spotless, just get it clean. Make sure that the surface the seal rides on, which is right here, is nice and clean. This is also a good time to make sure that there isn't a bunch of crap on your ABS sensor. Here comes the old SRT Grand Cherokee up the road. This is probably a little bit too much grease for the old spindle, but give her a nice coating of grease. Don't get excessive with the grease right here where the seal goes, because if you just get a bunch of excess grease on there, the seal will just push it off the backside and then it flings all over the rotor. Okay, we're ready for our rotor. Okay, we're ready for our washer and our nut. All right, there's 100 different ways people set up the preload on their bearings. I'm going to tell you how the Ford manual says to do it. So we got a torque wrench set to 25 foot-pounds. Yes, foot-pounds. And we're going to start cranking this nut down, turning the rotor counterclockwise. You'll feel it get some resistance. It's getting tight. All right, that's our initial preload. Back the nut off a half a turn. Now we're going to switch over to our inch-pounds torque wrench. And we're literally going to turn this guy 15 to 20 inch-pounds in a clockwise direction on the rotor spinning. And that's it. There shouldn't be any weird noises, and it should spin freely. We're going to put on our lock in the most appropriate position that lines up with a cotter pin hole. New cotter pin. It might take you a couple of tries to find a hole that works. There we go. Don't forget to bend it. Gonna put our dust cap back on. If your dust cap is mutilated, you may have to buy a new one. Don't smash it inwards. I should say don't dent it inwards. If you dent this in, it'll actually touch the spindle and it'll start grinding on itself. All right, we're gonna degrease the rotor and then put the caliper back on. Get both sides. Tiniest amount of grease will ruin your brake pads. Since this truck has wheel spacers on it, I'm going to give just the tiniest little ugga-duggas on the nuts to make sure that those have not loosened up at all. Those all seem totally fine. Now we're gonna Isaac and I put some new meats on the SRT Grand Cherokee the other day with the old Harbor Freight tire machine. Love those tires. stay. We're going to put a couple drops of blue Loctite on the caliper bolts. I do not know what the torque is for the caliper bolts. It is good and tight. I love it when these half-ass YouTuber mechanics such as myself just like totally put their arms right in this shot. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Tight. Yeah. Yep. Good and tight it is. All right, we're ready to slap the wheel back on. Caliper's torqued up. One more thing before I put the wheel back on as a public service announcement. Anytime you take a caliper off, make sure you didn't accidentally twist the hose 360 degrees when you're putting your caliper back on. I did that once before. Very dangerous, very embarrassing. Oh, damn it. Got a big old nasty chip in my super mega rare Speedline wheels. You have to get out the Krylon. Little baby Ugga Duggas and a star pattern, and then we'll take the torque wrench to them. Zero play, which is how it should be. All right, let's get her back on the ground, get the wheels torqued up. If you don't have one of those super mega Daytona jacks with the foot pedal pumper, highly recommend. All right, we're ready to road test this bad girl. I have a feeling that all my mystery steering wheel shake is going to be gone at freeway speeds, because otherwise there was no explanation for it. Everything else in the suspension is tight, so having clunking in your wheel bearings is not good. Hopefully this helps somebody do some random routine maintenance on their old Ford Ranger. So yeah, that's another job done. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, put them down in the comments below. Good, bad, criticism, ways to do it better, I don't care. doesn't hurt my feelings. I like to read the comments. So anyways, it's enough rambling. We'll see you all on the next one.